The autumn of 1781 painted Virginia in shades of amber and crimson, but 17-year-old Mercy Whitmore saw only the grey ash of her father's funeral pyre. 3 weeks had passed since Captain Jonathan Whitmore fell at Yorktown. 3 weeks since the British surrender that should have meant victory, should have meant celebration. Instead, it meant silence, a silence that had wrapped itself around Mercy's throat like a noose, stealing every word she might have spoken. Her aunt's farmhouse outside Williamsburg felt like a tomb. The rooms echoed with whispered conversations about the poor child and such a tragedy, and she'll speak when she's ready. But Mercy wondered if ready would ever come, if the words trapped inside her chest would ever find their way out again. The physician who had examined her after the funeral pronounced her physically sound, suggesting that time and patience would restore her voice. But Mercy knew the truth. Her silence wasn't born of injury, but of a grief so profound it had swallowed every word she'd ever learned. The morning mist clung to the tobacco fields like ghostly fingers as Mercy wandered the property's edge, seeking the solitude that had become her only comfort. The war might be over, but its aftermath stretched across the countryside like scattered bones. Abandoned camps, broken wagons, and the lost souls of those whose world had turned upside down overnight. Refugees wandered the roads daily, some seeking family, others fleeing the retribution that followed in the war's wake. The smell of wood smoke from burning debris still hung in the air, mixing with the earthy scent of fallen leaves and the lingering acrid odor of gunpowder that seemed to have soaked into the very soil. It was in the old barn, half collapsed and forgotten at the property's far edge, that Mercy first heard the soft sobbing. The structure had been damaged in a storm 2 summers past, its roof partially caved and its walls listing dangerously. No one used it anymore, which made it the perfect retreat for someone seeking to disappear. Weathered grey wood showed through gaps where chinking had fallen away, and wild vines had begun to reclaim the lower walls. She froze at the sound, her hand gripping the weathered doorframe. Through a gap in the rotted planks, she glimpsed a figure huddled in the hay. A girl about her own age, dressed in the remnants of what had once been fine clothing. The fabric, though torn and stained, spoke of quality tailoring and expensive dyes. Dark hair fell in tangled waves around pale shoulders that shook with each quiet sob. Even in her disheveled state, there was something ethereal about the stranger, as if she belonged more to fairy tale than reality. Mercy's instinct was to retreat, to leave this stranger to her grief as she wished others would leave her to hers. But something in the girl's posture, in the way she held herself as if trying to disappear entirely, made Mercy's feet root to the ground. There was a familiar quality to that desperation, a recognition that transcended words. She had seen that same posture in her own reflection these past weeks, the way trauma folded a person in on themselves, seeking invisibility as protection. The girl must have sensed her presence because she looked up suddenly, revealing eyes the color of storm clouds and a face marked by exhaustion and fear. They stared at each other across the dusty space, 2 young women caught in the debris of a war that had reshaped everything they knew. The girl's beauty was evident despite her disheveled state, high cheekbones, a delicate nose, and skin that spoke of a life lived away from manual labor. But it was the intelligence in her eyes, the quick assessment and wariness that held Mercy's attention. "Please," the stranger whispered, her accent carrying the refined tones of English society, mixed with something else, perhaps Scottish or Irish influences that had been carefully schooled away. "Don't tell them you saw me. I beg of you." Her voice carried desperation, but also a musical quality that suggested expensive education, the kind of tutoring that produced perfect diction and cultured speech patterns. Mercy opened her mouth, tried to form words of assurance or question, but nothing emerged. The silence that had claimed her stretched between them like a bridge neither could cross. She touched her throat unconsciously, a gesture that had become habit in recent weeks. feeling the muscles that refused to cooperate with her desire to speak. The girl's eyes widened with understanding, a flash of recognition that spoke to shared suffering. "You cannot speak." It wasn't a question, and Mercy found herself nodding, surprised by the relief of being understood without explanation. Most people assumed her silence was stubbornness or simple grief that conversation could cure. They offered platitudes and encouragement, never understanding that her voice hadn't been lost, but buried under the weight of sorrow, too heavy for words. The girl began, then stopped, her brow furrowing as if she'd forgotten something important. Her hand moved to her temple, pressing against it as if trying to squeeze out memories that wouldn't come. The gesture was unconscious but telling, suggesting injury or trauma that went beyond the physical. "I don't remember my name. I know I had one, I must have had one, but it's gone, like everything else." Her voice broke on the last words, revealing a vulnerability that called to Mercy's protective instincts. "They say I'm a Loyalist, that my family fled to Nova Scotia when the war turned," the girl continued, her words tumbling out as if she'd been holding them inside for days. "But I have no memory of family, no memory of fleeing. I woke up 3 days ago in a ditch outside Yorktown, with nothing but these clothes and this." She pulled a small silver pendant from beneath her torn bodice, holding it toward Mercy like an offering. The locket was dented and tarnished, its delicate engraving barely visible beneath dirt and damage. It hung from a chain that had once been beautiful, but now bore the marks of rough handling. The girl's hands shook as she spoke, and Mercy noticed the scratches and bruises that marked her arms, evidence of recent rough treatment. The torn state of her clothing suggested she had fled from someone or something, though whether her own memories or outside threats remained unclear. There were rope burns on her wrists that made Mercy's stomach clench with sympathetic pain. "They call me enemy," the girl continued, her voice barely above a whisper. "The townspeople, the soldiers still camped nearby waiting for discharge. They say Loyalists deserve whatever befalls them, that we chose our fate when we chose the crown. But how can I have chosen anything when I remember nothing? How can I be held accountable for allegiances I cannot recall?" The questions carried genuine anguish, the confusion of someone trying to navigate a world that had already judged her without trial. Mercy stepped closer, drawn by something she couldn't name. The girl's face was streaked with dirt and tears, but underneath the grime there was a vulnerability that called to something deep in Mercy's chest. Here was another soul adrift, another person whose very identity had been stolen by the cruel machinery of war. The connection she felt was immediate and inexplicable, as if recognizing a kindred spirit across the vast chasm of their shared silence. She reached out tentatively, her fingers hovering near the locket. The girl placed it in her palm without hesitation, and Mercy felt the weight of it, not just the silver, but the mystery it contained, the lost identity it represented. The metal was warm from being worn against skin, and she could feel delicate engravings beneath her fingertips. Under closer examination, she could make out what appeared to be initials surrounded by tiny vines. The wear had made them difficult to decipher. Their eyes met again, and in that moment, Mercy felt something shift inside her chest. The crushing weight of grief that had pressed down on her for weeks seemed to lift slightly, replaced by something that felt almost like purpose. The connection was instantaneous and profound, two souls recognizing each other across the wreckage of their former lives. Subscribe for the next chapter of this Revolutionary War love story. Will Mercy find her voice while helping this mysterious girl reclaim her past? Click the notification bell so you never miss our emotional historical romances that explore love blooming in the aftermath of war. Chapter 2. Sanctuary in Silence. Mercy pointed to herself, then pressed her hand to her heart before pointing to the unnamed girl. The gesture was simple, but its meaning was clear. "I understand. You are not alone." The connection she felt to this stranger was immediate and inexplicable, as if recognizing a kindred spirit across the vast chasm of their shared silence. In a world that had become cold and hostile, this moment of recognition felt like discovering a candle flame in absolute darkness. The girl's face crumpled with relief, tears spilling down her cheeks unchecked. "You would help me, even though I am supposedly your enemy, even though helping me could bring danger to your door." Her voice carried years of conditioning that suggested she expected rejection, abandonment, or worse. The surprise in her tone spoke of a world where kindness had become so rare that its appearance seemed miraculous. Mercy nodded without hesitation, surprising herself with the firmness of her resolve. The war might have divided their people, but in this forgotten barn, surrounded by the wreckage of their former lives, such divisions seemed as meaningless as the autumn leaves scattered on the wind. Her father had fought for independence, yes, but he had also taught her that mercy was the highest virtue, that enemies were often just people who had found themselves on the wrong side of circumstance. She could almost hear his voice. "True victory isn't in defeating your enemy, Mercy. It's in discovering they were never your enemy at all." Rising to her feet, Mercy gestured for the girl to wait, then hurried back across the fields toward her aunt's farmhouse. Her mind raced with plans and possibilities, weighing risks against the overwhelming need to help this lost soul. The house sat quiet in the afternoon light, its windows reflecting the golden autumn sky like watchful eyes. Smoke curled from the chimney, and she could smell bread baking, normal domestic scents that seemed to belong to another world entirely. Mercy's hands trembled as she gathered supplies from her aunt's well-stocked kitchen. Bread still warm from the morning's baking, a wedge of sharp cheese, a jar of preserves made from summer berries, and clean water in a ceramic jug. Each item felt weighted with purpose, with the strange urgency of a mission she couldn't fully understand, but felt compelled to complete. She also retrieved a clean shawl that had belonged to her cousin Margaret before typhus claimed her the previous winter, along with a small cake of soap and a clean cloth. The pantry yielded additional treasures: dried apples, a small pot of honey, and strips of salted pork wrapped in cloth. She worked quickly but carefully, taking only what wouldn't be immediately missed. Aunt Prudence was visiting the widow Patterson 2 miles down the road, a mercy call that would keep her occupied for hours. The older woman meant well with her constant hovering, her desperate attempts to coax words from Mercy's sealed lips, but her attention had become suffocating. This secret, this unnamed girl hiding in their barn, felt like the first thing that belonged entirely to Mercy since her father's death. For weeks, she had been passive, allowing grief to carry her along like debris in a flood. But now, for the first time since Yorktown, she felt the stirring of agency, of choice, of purpose beyond mere survival. The girl was still huddled in the hay when Mercy returned, but she'd managed to braid her dark hair back from her face and had attempted to brush the worst of the dirt from her torn skirts. The transformation revealed delicate features and eyes that held depths of intelligence despite their confusion. There was something almost ethereal about her in the dappled light filtering through the barn's broken roof, as if she were a character stepped out of the romantic novels Mercy's cousin used to read aloud on summer evenings. "You came back," the girl said, wonder coloring her voice as if kindness were a foreign concept she'd never encountered before. "I thought perhaps you might reconsider, might decide the risk was too great." The admission revealed how accustomed she'd become to disappointment, to promises broken and hope deferred. Mercy knelt beside her, spreading the food on a clean cloth with careful precision. The simple act felt ceremonial somehow, like a communion between two souls who had found each other in the wasteland of war's aftermath. The girl fell upon the food with desperate hunger that spoke of days without proper nourishment, and Mercy realized she had likely been surviving on whatever scraps she could forage or beg. As the girl ate, Mercy examined the mysterious locket more carefully, turning it over in the afternoon light. The engraving was indeed badly worn, weathered by time and rough handling, but under the golden light filtering through the barn's damaged roof, She could make out what appeared to be initials, ER. Surrounded by delicate vines and tiny flowers, the craftsmanship was exquisite, suggesting it had come from a skilled silversmith and represented considerable expense. She held it up, pointing to the letters questioningly. The girl paused in her eating, studying the locket with furrowed brows, as if trying to squeeze memory from the metal itself. ER, she repeated slowly, testing each letter on her tongue. Eleanor, Elizabeth, Emma, Evangeline. She shook her head in frustration. None of them feel right, as if they belong to me. It's as if I'm wearing someone else's jewelry, living in someone else's skin, carrying someone else's name. The girl's voice carried a note of desperate confusion that touched Mercy's heart. She had lost her father, but this girl had lost herself entirely. No memories, no family, no sense of identity beyond the clothes on her back, and a locket that might not even be hers. Mercy tucked the locket back into the girl's palm and placed her own hand over it, then pointed to the girl's heart. The message was clear. The name doesn't matter. You are who you choose to be now. Tears gathered in the girl's storm-colored eyes, and she clutched the locket tightly. How can someone I've known for mere hours understand me better than... She trailed off, then laughed bitterly. But I suppose I don't remember anyone else to compare it to, do I? For all I know, you may be the first person to show me genuine kindness in my entire life. They spent the remainder of the afternoon in comfortable silence, Mercy helping the girl clean her wounds with gentle efficiency. The injuries told a story of hard travel and rough treatment, scratches from brambles, bruises that suggested falls or blows, and those troubling rope burns that spoke of restraint or captivity. Each gentle touch with the damp cloth seemed to ease some of the girl's weariness, and Mercy found herself studying the delicate bone structure of her wrist, the way sunlight caught in her dark hair like captured starlight. There was an intimacy to the moment that transcended their brief acquaintance. Mercy had never been this close to another person outside her family, had never touched another's skin with such careful attention. The girl's trust, offered so readily despite their circumstances, felt like a precious gift that Mercy was determined to prove worthy of. As evening approached and the barn grew dim with gathering shadows, Mercy faced a dilemma. She couldn't leave this girl to spend another night in the cold barn, exposed to the elements and whatever dangers might prowl the countryside after dark. But bringing her to the house would mean explanations she couldn't give, questions she couldn't answer, and potentially exposing them both to discovery. The consequences of harboring a suspected loyalist were severe: imprisonment, property confiscation, or worse. The girl seemed to sense her internal struggle with an intuition that suggested both intelligence and sensitivity. "I cannot ask you to risk more for me," she said quietly, her voice carrying noble resignation. "You've already shown me more kindness than I have any right to expect. I won't be the cause of trouble for you." But even as she spoke, Mercy could see the fear in her eyes, the dread of another night alone and exposed. But Mercy had already made her decision. She shook her head firmly, then stood and beckoned for the girl to follow, her resolve strengthening with each step. There was an old root cellar beneath the farmhouse, accessed through a concealed entrance in the back garden that most visitors never noticed. Built by her late uncle during the early days of the war as a hiding place for valuables and supplies, it had served its purpose well when raiding parties, both British and continental, had swept through the area seeking provisions. Don't miss the next chapter. What happens when Mercy's secret is discovered? Will Grace find safety in Mercy's hidden sanctuary? Subscribe now and hit the bell icon for more Revolutionary War romance stories that will touch your heart. Chapter 3. Grace in the Shadows. They crept across the property as darkness fell, moving from shadow to shadow like conspirators in their own private rebellion. Mercy's heart hammered at every creak of a branch or distant sound that might herald discovery. The autumn night air carried the scent of wood smoke from neighboring farmhouses and the earthy smell of fallen leaves decomposing in the damp soil. Somewhere in the distance, a dog barked once before settling into silence again, and Mercy froze until she was certain it posed no threat to their clandestine mission. The root cellar's entrance was hidden beneath a wooden hatch disguised as part of the garden path, its hinges well-oiled from years of careful maintenance. Her uncle had been a meticulous man, understanding that survival often depended on such small details. Stone steps led down into the earth, where cool air and the scent of preserved foods greeted them. The space was larger than it appeared from above, carved from the natural hillside and reinforced with stone walls that kept it perpetually cool and dry. Mercy lit a small candle from the supply kept near the entrance, its warm glow revealing a sanctuary that seemed to belong to another world entirely. The walls were lined with shelves holding jars of preserved vegetables, dried herbs hanging in bundles, and sacks of grain stored for winter. In one corner, wooden crates contained blankets and clothing that had been stored against future need. The cellar felt safe, protected like a womb beneath the earth where the outside world couldn't intrude with its hatreds and suspicions. Working efficiently in the candlelight, Mercy arranged a makeshift bed in the corner farthest from the entrance, layering clean straw beneath wool blankets to create a comfortable resting place. She set out additional food from the cellar's stores and found a pitcher and basin for washing. Each gesture felt significant, weighted with the knowledge that she was creating more than just shelter. She was crafting a refuge for a soul in need. The girl watched in amazement as this sanctuary revealed itself, her eyes wide with gratitude and something approaching worship. "You're risking so much for me," she whispered, her voice echoing softly in the stone chamber. "Oh, what if your aunt discovers me? What if someone reports seeing strangers on the property? The authorities are still hunting for Loyalist refugees, and the bounties—" She didn't finish the sentence, but they both understood what capture would mean. Imprisonment at best, execution at worst. Mercy considered this soberly, weighing the very real dangers against the conviction that had been growing stronger with each hour they spent together. Then she made a decision that surprised her with its firmness. She pointed to herself, then to the girl, then linked their fingers together in the candlelight. The gesture was unmistakable. Whatever came, they would face it together. The touch of skin against skin sent an unexpected warmth up Mercy's arm, and she noticed how perfectly their hands fit together, as if they had been designed for this connection. The girl's face softened with gratitude and something else, something that made Mercy's chest tighten with unfamiliar warmth. There was beauty in her features, now that the dirt and exhaustion had been partially cleansed away. But more than that, there was a gentleness that called to something deep in Mercy's soul. "I don't know what I did in my forgotten life to deserve your protection," the girl said, her voice thick with emotion, "but I swear I will find a way to repay your kindness. If I ever recover my memories, if I ever discover who I truly am, I will remember this moment as the one that saved me." Mercy squeezed her hand gently, wanting to tell her that kindness needed no repayment, that helping her felt less like charity and more like— What? She couldn't name the feeling that drew her to this mysterious girl, but it was stronger than anything she'd felt since her father's death. It was as if this stranger had awakened something in her that grief had put to sleep, some capacity for connection and care that she'd thought lost forever. As she prepared to leave the girl safe in her hidden sanctuary, Mercy felt an unexpected reluctance to part company. The hours they had spent together had been the first since Yorktown when she hadn't felt completely alone, hadn't felt like she was drowning in silence and sorrow. The girl's presence had created a pocket of warmth in the cold landscape of her grief. The girl caught her sleeve as she moved toward the steps, and Mercy turned back to find those storm-colored eyes studying her with an intensity that made her breath catch. "Wait," the girl said softly, her voice carrying a note of sudden inspiration. "If I cannot remember my name, might I choose a new one? something that belongs to this new life, to this moment when everything changed. The idea was both radical and perfect. In the aftermath of war, many people had chosen to reinvent themselves, to leave behind identities that no longer served them or had become dangerous to maintain. Why shouldn't this girl, robbed of her memories by fate or trauma, have the same opportunity to begin anew? The concept spoke to something romantic and hopeful in Mercy's heart. The notion that people could shed their past like old clothes and emerge transformed. Mercy nodded encouragingly, settling back beside her new friend to witness this moment of rebirth. In the candlelight, the girl's face took on an almost sacred quality as she contemplated this choice that would define her future. The decision felt momentous, like watching someone step across a threshold from one life into another. The girl looked around the small cellar, taking in the humble shelter Mercy had provided, the basket of food, the warm blankets, and most importantly, the acceptance she'd been offered by a stranger who asked nothing in return. Her gaze lingered on Mercy's face, studying the features that had shown her such unexpected compassion. "Grace," she said finally, testing the word on her tongue like a prayer, "I should like to be called Grace, for this is the first grace I remember receiving, and perhaps the first I have ever truly understood." The name seemed to settle around her like a mantle, transforming her from nameless refugee to someone with identity and purpose. The choice was perfect in its simplicity and meaning. There was something graceful in the way she moved, despite her exhaustion, something elegant in her bearing that spoke of careful upbringing. But more than that, the name represented a new beginning, a chance to become whoever she chose to be, rather than whoever she had been. It was an act of faith in the future, a declaration that beauty and meaning could emerge from even the darkest circumstances. Mercy smiled, the first real smile to cross her face since Yorktown. The expression felt strange on her lips after weeks of sorrow, but it also felt right, as if this girl's presence was slowly melting the ice that had formed around her heart. She pointed to herself, then carefully spelled out her name in the air with her finger, M-E-R-C-Y. "Mercy and Grace," the newly christened Grace whispered, testing how the words sounded together in the intimate space. How perfectly fitting that we should find each other in this broken world. Two virtues that the war tried to destroy, taking refuge together. The symbolism wasn't lost on either of them. In a time when mercy was often seen as weakness and grace as luxury, they had found both in each other. Before leaving, Mercy made sure Grace understood the cellar's layout completely, showing her where additional supplies were stored and how to extinguish the candles safely if she heard anyone approaching above. She demonstrated the simple signals they would use, a particular pattern of knocks that would identify friend from foe, and hand gestures that could convey basic needs and emotions. As she climbed the stone steps back to the world above, Mercy carried with her the image of Grace's grateful smile and the warmth of their joined hands. For the first time since her father's death, she felt something beyond grief. She felt hope, purpose, and the stirring of an emotion she dared not yet name. Will Mercy's aunt discover their secret? Can Grace reclaim her lost past while building a new future? Subscribe and ring the notification bell for the next chapter of this touching Revolutionary War romance that proves love can bloom even in the darkest of times.